welcome the members of the public and the media to the council meeting, and I remind you that the meeting is being recorded. Time during the meeting. Please remain quiet in the audience so everyone can hear the meeting. Anyone disrupting the meeting may be asked to leave. I would like to remind everyone that planning meetings do not have public question time. If you'd like to submit a public question, please refer to the information on Council's website or contact our Customer Service Centre. The City of Casey acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Apologies this evening. We've received an apology from Councillor Rowe, Councillor Stapleton and Councillor Rosario, who's currently stuck in traffic and may make the meeting at some point. However, I'll mark him as an apology. Moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Flannery. Is there any dissent? Then there is no dissent. That item is carried. Confirmation of minutes. Is there a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes of the planning meeting held Tuesday, 10 July 2018? Moved by Mayor Ablett, seconded by Councillor Aziz. Is there any dissent? If there is no dissent, then that item is carried. Does any councillor have any conflict of interest or personal interest that they wish to declare? Interest must be declared prior to the meeting or the consideration of the item. There are no declarations of conflict of interest. We will move on to officers' reports. Are there any items councillors wish to have withdrawn for further consideration? Councillor Aziz, item 1.1. Thank you. Therefore, is there a mover and seconder to adopt the recommendations contained in item 2.1 and item 7.1? Moved by Councillor Flannery, seconded by Councillor Smith. If there is no dissent, then that item is carried. We'll move on to item 1.1. Councillor Aziz, I understand you have an alternative motion to put.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The alternate motion should be above us on the screens.
Thank you, Councillor Liz. And I note that Councillor Flannery has foreshadowed a further alternate should the motion be lost.
Thank you. So I move that in my name.
Moved by Councillor Aziz, second by Councillor Cristani. Is there any dissent?
Mr. Chairman, I need to introduce the
Please.
motion. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this alternate motion was drafted in consultation with our officers and was circulated to all councillors yesterday for them to consider the meritorious arguments of actually granting a permit to this proposal and allowing the church involved to construct new amenities on that site. This matter, Mr. Chairman, has been in discussion between the community groups and also our officers for a very long time, and that discussion at times has also involved neighbouring properties which the church community has consulted with. My firm belief, Mr. Chairman, that the alternate recommendation before us to grant a planning permit will actually produce a strong net community benefit from the fact that we will have a significant congregation, all of whom are professionals, and will add a great amenity and great benefit to the City of Casey when we're thinking about our broader strategies of economic development, jobs, and also supporting our growth with growth in our local economy. And so this will see many people consider moving to the City of Casey. It will see people now thinking about moving businesses or starting new business operations in the City of Casey, and will add greatly to the community in that regard alone. Further to this, Mr. Chairman, given that there has been issues raised at a planning level in terms of some of the planning aspects of this particular development, I'm pleased to report to the Chamber tonight that there are conditions that have been imposed in this alternate recommendation to respond to and ameliorate any amenity impacts, and we are being responsible in this regard in ensuring that those conditions are apparent in the alternate that we are providing before us in the Chamber today. The church community has been very responsible, Mr. Chairman, in working cooperatively with Council to produce this, and have actually produced amended plans which are encapsulated in the alternate recommendation that I'm arguing for tonight, to remove the caretaker building and the hall at the rear of the site. This reduces the site coverage and footprint and provides more opportunity for landscaping in line with the amenity of the area in which the development is proposed. We know, of course, that this is not the only church on Pound Road. There is another church some 100 metres down the road, and so this is not a unique development in that particular part of Narre Warren. This is a development that actually fits very well with the local environment as it stands, and as I said, will add a great deal to the city of Casey. Finally, Mr. Chairman, there's been some issues raised in relation to Bartok Court access timelines and when Vic Roads intends to develop that and start works. My firm belief, and this is backed by a number of officers that I've spoken to in the city of Casey, is that those feared concerns about future access may in fact be at least a decade away. We don't believe that Vic Roads will act on this for at least a decade, or at least I don't believe that from the discussions and the discourse that has been made in relation to this particular aspect. If that's the case, and if that's one of the reasons why the officers initially recommended that this development application not be approved, then we are giving away many, many years of benefit, at least a decade of benefit, as a result of this community coming to the city of Casey for a presumed fear that's really in the realms of the unknown. And that is not responsible planning, Mr. Chairman, and that is not consistent with the city of Casey's corporate plan, nor is it consistent with its strategic objectives of creating jobs, attracting innovation, and attracting people that will make a huge contribution to our city, which this congregation, Mr. Chairman, I'm absolutely confident with. I commend the alternate recommendation to the Chamber, and I rest my case on this point, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Aziz. Is there any dissent? There is dissent from Councillor Flannery. Councillor Castano, do you wish to speak? Reserve your right. You reserve your right. You may proceed, Councillor Flannery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's unfortunate that it's got to this stage because, as a lot of people probably don't know, that Councillor Aziz and I are ward councillors for the same ward. It's very disappointing for the both of us to be sitting here today arguing different alternatives to this motion. I was involved, I've only been involved in this issue over the last few months, and you know, I've gone backwards and forwards to the officers to find out the best result. Councillor Aziz said that it's going to be 10 years down the track before anything happens, and you know, by that time the Yaps will be in their 70s, and you know, they're deserving, and so are the rest of the neighbours in the area are deserving their peace and quiet, because once Pound Road gets locked off, the access to Pound Road is going to come through Bartok Court, new residential zone. So not only will the Yaps have traffic coming out of the church running up along their bedroom side, but they'll also having traffic coming from Bartok Court from the new development and also from the Reformed Church coming past his front door. So Mr. Yap is in a no-win situation if it's a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And plus on 7 times a year where it's going to have functions up until 1 o'clock. You imagine how many cars are going to be driving past the Yaps windows, and you know, I think that if somebody's in their 70s and probably would be retired, that it'd be a disappointing result. I think last week we were at a council meeting, and Councillor Aziz got up and he showed us a video of a truck going down this a one-way court, or a court.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
What's your point of order, Councillor?
Relevance. These are completely two different situations, and I don't believe that it's relevant that Councillor Flannery would bring that issue into play, given that it was a completely different location. And like I said in my introduction to this motion, the Vic Roads action on that particular court is at least a decade away. So we should not be talking about things that currently don't exist and then mixing matters in this manner. So I ask that you rule on the point of relevance, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Aziz. A rule in favour of Councillor Aziz at this point, Councillor Flannery. I think there is some distinction to be made, and in that regard, I don't think we should. I understand where your point was going, but I accept that we shouldn't be muddling different areas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies to Councillor Aziz. Look, based on the recommendations of grounds of refusal, a summary of the main issues are the height and intensity of use of the development building, 14 metres tall, up to 180 persons, 7 days a week, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. until 1 a.m. for special events. Negative impact on surrounding residents' amenities. The form and intensity of the proposal is out of keeping with the existing preferred low-density character and will result in unreasonable loss of amenities and surrounding
Mr. Chairman.
properties.
Point of order. This time, error of fact as well as relevance again, because before us on the screen we have an alternate recommendation that has conditions that address many of the issues that Councillor Flannery is raising, and therefore it is most unfair to bring those issues into play, given that we have a recommendation before us with strict and tight conditions that answer the very points that Councillor Flannery is raising. So I'm raising in this instance 2 points of order, one on error of fact and second, relevance.
Thank you, Councillor Aziz. Before I rule, just a question to Councillor Flannery. Councillor Flannery, as I understand it, are you reading from the original planning officer's recommendations?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I am.
You're not paraphrasing them, they are words. Councillor Aziz, I'm going to rule against you in this matter. Councillor Flannery is reading planning officer's recommendations in relation to this. I accept your view that there are some changes and conditions, but I'm going to rule against you this way in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now raise a point of order against yourself, and that's on the basis of error of fact where you get to rule on it. And the facts are that whatever Councillor Flannery is reading has been superseded by what's before us on the screen, and therefore it is irrelevant and it is an error of fact. So I appreciate your ruling, but I'm now raising a point of order against you in relation to error of fact because we have a superseded motion.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. And as stated before, Councillor Flannery, that Councillor Flannery is speaking in relation to officers' recommendations prior. I accept there are changes in further conditions in relation to this alternative motion. But given, Councillor Aziz, that the original recommendations of the officers were in consideration of this site, and I believe that some of the information that Councillor Flannery is reading is relevant to that, I don't believe it's an error of fact, and I'm going to rule against you. Councillor Aziz, Councillor Flannery, you only have 29 seconds left, so perhaps you might want to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The proposal generally does not comply to council non-residential users policy and residential area policy clauses 22.02 or clause 21.03 settlement of housing and clause 2107 building environment. Also, it's going to have an environmental impact on the wombats, the echidnas, and the black cockatoos that come there and feed off the seeds. There are wild animals, and I think that they should also be protected and have a say.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. Is there any more dissent, as Councillor Cristani's reserved her right? Councillors, I will only speak very briefly on the matter in... Sorry, Councillor Ablett. Question? I'll allow the question first. And Councillor Cristani, you had a question? So I'll allow the question first.
Did you have a question?
Councillor Ablett.
My question. Probably Mr. Fitchett. I guess in summary, you've got an original officer's report, you've seen the alternative. How does the alternative sit with officers? Reasons for and against.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. The officers still stand by at this point in time, until there's a council decision otherwise, the officers still stand by their decision, their consideration in the report, that council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit.
Councillor Cristani.
I have a question as well.
Yeah, Councillor Cristani, then I'll come to you, Councillor Aziz. Councillor Cristani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, through you, commend Councillor Flannery for trying to bring a diplomatic resolution to this and bringing all parties to meet. I am still going to vote with Councillor Aziz's alternate recommendation, but I think you deserve to be acknowledged for your efforts, and it has been a challenging one. And I just want to say I thank you that you've worked hard on this and you haven't taken it lightly. Neither has Councillor Aziz. He has worked very hard on this as well. Occasionally, more councillors disagree, but I just think that you should be honoured for that, for weighing the concerns of the original recommendation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cristani. I'll take that as are you and aware. Councillor Aziz, you had a question?
Yes, I have a question to the Director of Planning, Mr. Fitchett. Mr. Fitchett, would you please advise Council if this is the first time ever in history that Council has moved a resolution that is contrary to the officer's recommendation?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it would not be the first time that councillors have moved an alternate recommendation.
Further question, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, Councillor Aziz.
And what happens when councillors move an alternate recommendation? Do you believe that the process that I have followed in this instance is consistent with best practice in relation to that, in the sense that I have consulted with the officers, I've asked what their views are in terms of the alternate recommendation and presented meritorious planning arguments in my view for that alternate, and then asked them to actually draft the conditions to ensure that it meets with their expectations? Would you say that that would be best practice in this instance, given that the recommendation before us is not actually my brainchild in terms of the conditions, but actually occurred as a result of advice from the officers to make sure that this particular application is as tight and as compliant as possible?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, the practice that's encouraged by the officers with the councils is that there be consultation prior to an alternate planning recommendation being put forward, and that's in the interests of the alternate being a defensible position if it is required to be contested at VCAT, and certainly that's been followed in this circumstance where Councillor Aziz has sought out the advice of the staff to construct an alternate recommendation and conditions that may be defensible at VCAT.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like my gratitude to Mr. Fitchett recorded for outlining the facts exactly as they occurred. Thank you.
Councillor Aziz. Does any other councillor have a question? Councillor Ablett.
Just a question, Mr. Fitchett. What I'm picking up is you're saying that, and I'll ask you, Sam, with this new alternate, you're saying that there should be consultation with the people, or two parts. Does this cut it as far as planning goes to fit where it's going, one? And two, should there be consultation with the people in regard to what's been put forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Turner assisted in the construction of the relevant conditions that are put forward in the alternate, so I might actually defer to his expertise in this regard.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. To be clear, the recommendation remains as it's printed in the paper. So the recommendation of the officers is that the application should be refused. The process that we've gone through is to assist Councillor Aziz in terms of crafting conditions that would serve his intent to put an alternate motion to the councillors tonight.
Yep, Councillor, one more question. Do you require Mr. Turner still there?
Can I ask you, that in your opinion, with the original compared to the alternative, going back to the original, was there consultation with the original, and should there be consultation with the alternative?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for clarity, consultation with...
With the people affected by the area.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Question.
Thank you for the clarity. So the site is affected by a development plan overlay under the Casey planning scheme, and the effect of the overlay is that there's no formal public notification rights or obligations under the planning scheme. The council has had in place an informal practice of notifying immediately adjoining neighbours, and I'm told that in this instance there were 15 letters that went out as a result of the planning application. The consideration as to whether when an applicant relodges amended plans, the normal consideration is whether those plans, if they increase the level of detriment, you know, for example, if they're moving buildings closer to boundaries, then the normal practice would be that you would go back through a second round of public notice, and in this case, informal notice. In this instance, the effect of the changes that the applicant has put forward actually, remove buildings that were close to boundaries. So the first point is there's no statutory requirement to give public notice in the first instance or in the second instance, and the other point is that the plans that have been lodged more recently actually increase setbacks and respond to some of those concerns.
Yep, Councillor, you had one
Just
question.
one last one. Thank you for that clarity. So, with the alternative put up, does it tick the boxes needed for this to go ahead, having given the changes that have been made?
Planning decisions are difficult, and this tonight, this
That's
tonight.
not helping me.
No, I know, and I'll answer your question. This tonight highlights the competing objectives and interests that come into some planning decisions. So they're not always easy decisions, and I certainly understand the arguments on both sides of the equation, and our view, again, on balance, is that the application should not be supported, and that's the recommendation that we've put in the paper tonight, and as is explained in the supporting agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Ziz, I understand you had a question, then to you, Councillor Flannery.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Turner. I do record my appreciation and your assistance in formulating with me the conditions to tighten this matter and make sure that it is compliant. You did refer to me in the plural, councillors as is. I have lost a lot of weight, so I'm not sure why you did that, but it's fine. I'm joking. Mr. Turner, has it been your experience, and I know you are regarded not just in this council but in the state of Victoria as one of the most effective planners the world has seen, has it been your experience that in matters like this, where there is an alternate recommendation, that the council actually stops and goes out and consults on the alternate recommendation before it makes a decision, particularly in the context of your answer where you've said that there is absolutely no statutory requirement for consultation in relation to this matter?
Councillors are within their right to put an alternate and to take an alternate direction, and that typically would not involve going back out to the community to
Thank you,
consult on
Mr.
that.
Turner. You've answered my question.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. You may need to stay there, Mr. Turner, just in case. Councillor Flannery, was your question for Mr. Turner?
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Turner, look, thanks for everything you've done over the last month or so, trying to guide me in the right direction. Maybe I could be speaking out of turn, but I'm going to ask a question anyway. If this application alternate motion gets passed and the objectives go to VCAT, what is the likelihood of council winning or losing?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Councillor Ziz.
He's asking a hypothetical. We are not VCAT. VCAT makes interesting decisions, one of which we suffered from at the last council meeting, and the biggest one was in relation to Stevenson's Road. So this is a hypothetical, and I don't think Mr. Turner can answer for a judicial body which is completely unpredictable anyway on the best days.
No, thank you, Councillor Aziz. And as someone that works in the field on a daily basis, Councillor Flannery, I'm going to rule in Councillor Aziz's favour. I don't think it's appropriate that we ask the officers to have a guess at what VCAT, an independent judicial member, may or may not do. I think you can, and as Councillor Aziz rightly pointed out, and I've seen it every day of the week in my working life, you can get all sorts of interesting decisions out of the officers, of the judicial officers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I apologise to Mr. Turner for trying to put him on the spot with that question.
I need to
So,
apologise,
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flannery. Councillor Gillich?
Thanks for your explanation. So what I'm confused with is, and what I just explained, it's pretty easy. It's just a yes or no answer. I understand that you're saying that it's a no, you wouldn't support it. I understand all of that. But when Councillor Aziz said, does this now meet planning guidelines? Like, if this was its own thing, that we didn't have this going on, what I'm asking is, does it actually go against any of the rules? Does it fit the guidelines? Or, because you didn't really give a yes or no answer. And the thing is, for us to vote, we really need some kind of clear answer. And you're kind of dancing around it, and I'm sorry, I don't mean it like you, but you know, I'd like to understand a bit better, just a really clear-cut answer of, does it meet it or does it not, you know? And I understand it's a no to you and to the other officers, but I'm asking itself, does it?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gillich. Mr. Turner, I understand Councillor Gillich's was a yes or no question. I don't believe you can probably answer it in yes or no. However, up to you.
The answer is no. I mean, we are recommending refusal. We had the option of recommending approval, and so whilst we've assisted in terms of the drafting of this alternate, our view is as is printed in the documents tonight.
Yeah. Councillor Gillich, and I might add to Mr. Turner's response, you know, as we know, Councillor Aziz has consulted the Planning Department in terms of crafting the conditions behind it. Mr. Turner, would I be right in suggesting conditions aren't identical to, so you can attach conditions to developments or developers, for example, to tighten what is occurring to protect the interests of the community, but on the flip side, it may not match, for example, a planning overlay. But I accept Councillor Aziz has consulted the Planning Department to ensure the conditions are as tight as possible. Councillor Crestani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, through you to Mr. Fitchett again. Yep. I believe you said, Mr. Fitchett, I don't usually like to do this, but there seems to be two different scenarios coming out of both of you. You did say that these conditions will be put us in a more defensible position should it be contested at VCAT. Is that correct?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, I did say that. The intent of providing alternative recommendations to council is to make sure that the recommendations have a sound footing in regard to planning law, and that they can be represented to the tribunal in a defensible way.
Thank you. Councillor Aziz, you had a question. Then
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of are you awares.
certainly, perhaps, Councillor Aziz, if they are you as Councillor Abbott, you have a question.
No, but they're relevant to the immediate questions that have been
Proceed,
asked.
Councillor Aziz.
Mr. Chairman, are you aware that conditions are conditions? Are you also aware that the City of Casey has a planning enforcement department whose job is to ensure compliance with those conditions? And are you further aware that when people don't comply with the conditions, they can actually be prosecuted by the City of Casey?
Thank you, Councillor Aziz. Councillor Abbott, you had a question.
No, are you aware?
Is that that's a rhetorical? The RU as a generally.
Well, are you aware, Mr. Chairman, of
um,
all those things?
So is that a question, Councillor?
To you,
the
Mr.
Chair?
Chairman, 3 questions. Are you aware?
Yes, I am aware.
Excellent.
Councillor
Thank you.
Mr. Councillor Ablett.
Yeah, I just want a bit more clarity to Mr. Turner. What's been put forward under the 1987 Planning Environment Act and the Casey Planning Scheme, and the changes that have been made, and the rooms that have been moved, is it, I guess the question that a number have asked is what's before us acceptable to be put forward under the Act?
This through you, Mr. Chairman. This might be helpful if you think about it as a 2-step process. The first step is as a matter of principle, an appropriate use and development for the site. So that's the first question that you ask yourself, and the officer's recommendation to that is no, that it's not. The second part of it is what conditions can you attach to it. So now I respect Councillor Aziz as putting an alternate, he has an alternate view in terms of the first step, and so what we have simply done is assisted him to craft conditions that meet the first step that he's taken. So I'm not sure whether that helps or not.
Yeah,
But
so the question I want is,
Further question?
and I know I've tried to work myself through the first and second step you've just said.
Yes.
What I'm getting at is, under the Act and the Casey Planning Scheme, is what's up there, and I came in with an open mind, thought I'd go one way, but I'm actually looking at what's up in front of me. Under the Act and the Casey Planning Scheme, with a yes or no, is that before us acceptable?
Point of order. Point of
It's a
order.
straight question.
No, point of order.
Point of order first, Councillor Aziz. Your point of order.
Mr. Chairman, one is relevance and also error of fact in some way, because this is not the first time we've done this. And I asked the Mayor if he's ever asked this question in relation to any other matter before us where we have actually adopted a different recommendation to the officers. It's not fair that this is raised in relation to this matter when we're not being Robinson Crusoe in this case, and we have had many matters in the past where we have moved an alternate recommendation where the question now asked by Councillor Ablett, our Mayor, was never asked in that instance. It's not relevant.
Thank you, Councillor Aziz. Councillor Ablett, before I rule, a question for you. Are you, and perhaps it's the phrasing of the question, you trying to understand whether the motion before the chamber complies with the planning requirements as a council? Am I on the track in terms of your question or not?
Yes, and I'm just trying to understand, is what's before us acceptable under the Planning Act? That this gets voted through? Does it tick the boxes?
Yeah, Councillor Aziz, I rule against.
A straight question. I wasn't actually having a crack at Councillor Aziz. I actually wanted to know for myself.
Thank you, Councillor Ablett. I think I rule against you, Councillor Aziz. I think it's a fair question to Mr. Turner, and it's a question essentially in complete irrelevance. Does this comply with our obligations?
Then I have a further question, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, Councillor Aziz. Mr. Turner, do you require the question again?
Yes, please.
Councillor Ablett, could you ask the question to Mr. Turner again, please?
Certainly. Does what's before us tick all the boxes as far as the Planning Act? So can this be voted through legally under the Planning Act and Casey Planning Scheme with the amendments that have been made? Which is a yes or no? Can it be?
It can legally be, yes.
That's what I want.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Councillor Aziz, did you have a further question or not?
I think Mr. Turner's answer has probably negated my further question.
Thank you, Councillor Ziz. Are there any further questions? Councillors, there's been a lot of debate, and before I go to Councillor Cristani, I thank all the councillors for the debate. I thank them for the conduct of the debate. Councillors, in my view is I will be also dissenting on the matter. My dissent is on the original planning grounds provided by the officers. Councillors, and I'll leave you with this, and it's advice that I received earlier from the planning department, is in the last financial year, so 17-18, and we as council got our decision 60% right in terms of challenges at VCAT, so we were getting it relatively right. We are quite a low council in terms of challenges, so I think the majority of the time the planning committee gets it right and the planning department gets it right. I'd also highlight the fact that in the 17-18 year, and I accept there are only 2 of them, councillors, is before I give you this stat, that in the last financial year, 2 challenges of which we overturned officers' decisions, so went against officers' recommendation, and that was challenged at VCAT. So I'm saying we went against it and it was challenged. I'm not talking about the ones that were not challenged. There are only 2 of them. I accept that, but we lost both of them.
Mr. Chairman, could you highlight what they are?
I can't give you the precise.
Mr. Chairman, I raise a point of order
Certainly,
against you in
Councillor
relation
Ziz.
to relevance, because we don't know what they are, so you can't just say there were 2 challenges without explaining how that is relevant to the matter before us.
Thank you, Councillor Ziz. I accept your point in relation to that. Surprisingly, I'll accept and rule against myself in that matter, Councillor Aziz. Councillor Castani, you
Reserve my right.
reserved your right. Do you wish to speak?
Just very minor.
Certainly,
I just
Councillor
want to,
Castani.
I thank you for the rigorous debate there. Again, I reiterate, we are the ones making the assessment. So I think that we are acting within our legal rights, and this is what we're called upon to make a decision on this. So that's all I have to say.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Councillor Cristani. Therefore, I put it to the vote. All those in favour? All those against? That item is carried.
Division,
Division.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ziz. Councillor Ziz is called division. All those in favour? Councillor Smith, Councillor Aziz, Councillor Saray, Councillor Gillich, Councillor Cristani, Councillor Ablett. All those against? Councillor Jackson, Councillor Flannery and Councillor Rosario. That item is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I close the meeting.